In the marble corridors of Baldoria Palace, where every whisper carries the weight of a kingdom's fate, Queen Consort Helena believed her greatest enemy was the press. She was wrong. The most dangerous betrayal would come not from tabloid headlines or political opposition, but from the silk-wrapped letters hidden beneath her own jewelry box. In a world where trust is currency and secrets are weapons, one woman's forbidden correspondence would topple the very foundations of a 1,000-year-old monarchy. Sometimes the quietest betrayals echo the loudest. The morning mist clung to Baldoria Palace like a guilty secret, as Queen Consort Helena Blackwood adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time. Through the ornate windows of her private chamber, she could see the royal gardens where gardeners moved like chess pieces across perfectly manicured lawns. Everything in her life appeared ordered, controlled, pristine. Yet beneath this surface of royal perfection, Helena harbored a correspondence that would shake the very foundations of the Valdorian crown. Helena had not been born into royalty. 23 years ago, she was simply Helena Blackwood, the intelligent daughter of a prominent banking family. Her marriage to Crown Prince Alexander had been scrutinized, criticized, and ultimately accepted by a kingdom that prided itself on tradition. She had transformed herself from a commoner into a queen consort, learning protocol, perfecting her public smile, and mastering the delicate art of royal diplomacy. A transformation, she had discovered, was a double-edged sword. The first letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring, delivered not through official channels but slipped discreetly beneath a stack of charity correspondence by Marcus Thornfield, her longtime private secretary. Marcus had served 3 generations of Valdorian royalty, his loyalty seemingly unquestionable, his discretion absolute. Helena had trusted him with her schedule, her private thoughts, and eventually, her deepest vulnerabilities. The letter bore the seal of the Republic of Astoria, Valdoria's neighboring nation. Political tensions between the two countries had simmered for decades, rooted in territorial disputes and trade disagreements that seemed to resurface with each new generation of leadership. Officially, Helena had no business corresponding with Astorian officials. Personally, she felt compelled to try. Helena's first correspondence with Minister Victor Reyes of Astoria had been innocent enough.
She genuinely believed that quiet diplomacy, woman to woman, person to person, might bridge gaps that formal negotiations had failed to close.
Her letter spoke of shared concerns for border communities, of children who played together despite their different flags.
She signed it simply H and sent it through Marcus, trusting his connections to ensure discreet delivery. Minister Reyes had responded with surprising warmth and insight.
His letter spoke not of political maneuvering, but of genuine human concerns. He wrote about his own daughter, about the economic struggles facing working families in both nations, about his hope that future generations might inherit cooperation rather than conflict.
Helena found herself looking forward to his responses, these islands of authentic conversation in an ocean of formal royal obligations. King Alexander ruled with wisdom and dedication, but Helena often felt like an ornament in his court rather than a partner in governance. Their marriage, while respectful and affectionate, had grown into something comfortable but distant. Alexander consulted his council of advisors, his military leaders, his economic ministers. Helena attended charity functions, cut ribbons, and smiled for photographers. The letters from Minister Reyes offered her something she hadn't realized she craved: intellectual partnership in the sense that her thoughts mattered beyond their publicity value. As months passed, their correspondence grew more frequent and more personal.
Helena shared her frustrations with royal protocol, her ideas for social programs that never seemed to gain traction, her loneliness within palace walls. Reyes wrote about his own struggles with political pressure, his efforts to modernize Astoria's economy, his belief that Helena possessed wisdom that her kingdom underutilized.
Neither explicitly acknowledged the dangerous territory they were entering. Marcus Thornfield facilitated each exchange with smooth efficiency. He had served Helena faithfully for 8 years, ever since she became queen consort. His father had served King Alexander's mother, and his grandfather had served Alexander's grandfather. The Thornfield family had built their reputation on unwavering loyalty and absolute discretion. When Helena needed something done quietly, Marcus made it happen. When she needed advice on navigating palace politics, Marcus provided guidance. She had come to view him as her most trusted advisor, perhaps her only true friend within the royal household. The transformation in Helena was subtle but noticeable. She began speaking more confidently in council meetings, offering opinions on international relations that surprised both Alexander and his advisors.
She proposed new initiatives for cross-border humanitarian aid, suggesting approaches that seemed remarkably well-informed. Alexander attributed this to his wife's natural intelligence finally finding its proper outlet. His advisors credited her growing confidence to maturity and experience. None suspected that her insights came from secret correspondence with their political rival. Helena told herself that her letters served Valdoria's interests. Better to understand Astoria's perspective through private channels than to remain blind to their motivations. If she could identify common ground, perhaps she could influence official negotiations in productive directions.
She was building bridges, not burning them. She was serving peace, not betraying loyalty.
These justifications grew easier to believe with each letter exchanged. The letters also awakened something in Helena that had been dormant for years. Reyes wrote with intelligence and passion about literature, philosophy, and social justice. Their correspondence evolved beyond diplomatic concerns to encompass discussions of poetry, debates about governance theory, and shared recommendations for books that shaped their worldviews. Helena found herself intellectually stimulated in ways that her royal duties never provided. She began to look forward to their exchanges with an anticipation that should have warned her about the dangerous path she was walking. Marcus Thornfield managed every detail of the correspondence with characteristic precision. He established secure channels through a network of discreet contacts, ensuring that letters reached their destination without passing through official diplomatic channels. He advised Helena on timing, suggesting when Alexander's schedule would keep him too busy to notice her preoccupation with her private writing. He even helped her develop a simple code for sensitive topics, though Helena convinced herself that such precautions were merely prudent rather than evidence of wrongdoing. The first crack in Helena's carefully constructed rationalization appeared during a state dinner honoring Valdoria's military commanders. As she listened to General Morrison discuss Astoria's recent military exercises near their shared border, Helena realized she possessed information that could provide useful context. Minister Reyes had mentioned these exercises in a recent letter, explaining them as routine training rather than aggressive posturing. Helena found herself wanting to share this insight but unable to explain how she had acquired it. For the first time, she fully grasped the compromising position she had created. That night, alone in her chambers, Helena reread Minister Reyes's most recent letter. His words seemed different now, weighted with implications she hadn't previously considered. His casual mention of Valdoria's trade negotiations, his questions about Alexander's health, his curiosity about upcoming state visits. Details that had seemed like friendly interest now appeared potentially strategic. Helena began to wonder whether she was building bridges or providing intelligence. Sleep eluded her as she contemplated the implications of her secret correspondence. She had rationalized her actions as unofficial diplomacy, but unofficial could easily become unauthorized. Unauthorized could become treasonous. The word hung in her mind like a sword, sharp and terrifying. Helena had grown up reading about queens who had fallen from grace, about royal consorts who had overstepped their bounds. History was not kind to women who forgot their place, even when their intentions were honorable. Marcus Thornfield had scheduled their usual weekly review meeting for the following morning. Helena planned to discuss ending the correspondence, perhaps gradually, without arousing suspicion or causing diplomatic incident. She would explain to Reyes that official channels were more appropriate for continued dialogue. She would thank him for his insights while firmly establishing proper boundaries. She would protect both herself and her kingdom by stepping back from the dangerous path she had been walking. Helena spent the dawn hours composing what she intended to be her final letter to Minister Reyes. She wrote carefully, diplomatically, expressing gratitude for their correspondence, while suggesting that future communication should proceed through official channels. She sealed the letter with her private seal, one last time, and prepared to entrust it to Marcus for delivery. This would end it. This would restore proper boundaries. This would eliminate the risk she had unknowingly created. But Helena's carefully laid plans to end her correspondence would prove irrelevant. Unknown to her, powerful forces had already discovered her secret. In the shadows of Valdoria Palace, wheels were turning that would soon expose not only her forbidden letters, but also the depth of betrayal that surrounded them. The quiet betrayal was about to become very loud indeed. King Alexander stood motionless in his private study, staring at the collection of photocopied letters spread across his mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. The morning sun streaming through tall windows seemed to mock the darkness of his discovery. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted one letter, recognizing his wife's distinctive handwriting, her private seal, her signature. Each page felt heavy with implications that threatened to shatter not only his marriage but the stability of his kingdom.
The revelation had come from Sir Edmund Halifax, the kingdom's spymaster, a man whose loyalty to the crown had never been questioned in 30 years of service.
Halifax had requested an urgent private meeting, his weathered face grave with the weight of terrible news. He had spoken carefully, methodically, laying out a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the royal household. Helena's correspondence with Minister Reyes was only the beginning of a web of deception that threatened national security. According to Halifax's investigation, Marcus Thornfield had been selling information to Astorian intelligence services for over 2 years. The trusted private secretary had used his position to photograph sensitive documents, record private conversations, and report on the royal family's personal relationships and political discussions. Helena's innocent correspondence had provided perfect cover for espionage activities that went far deeper than romantic letters between lonely officials.
Alexander read Helena's letters with growing anguish. Her words revealed loneliness, intellectual frustration, and a desperate hunger for meaningful connection that their marriage had failed to provide. She wrote about feeling invisible in council meetings, about ideas that were dismissed because of her gender and background, about the suffocating weight of royal protocol. Alexander recognized the truth in her complaints and felt the sharp pain of his own failure as a husband and partner. But understanding Helena's motivations didn't diminish the security implications of her actions. Minister Reyes's responses, which Halifax had also obtained, showed sophisticated intelligence gathering disguised as personal interest. Questions about Alexander's health had been followed by inquiries about succession planning. Casual curiosity about state visits had preceded detailed questions about security arrangements. Comments about economic policy had evolved into probing questions about military budgets and defense strategies. Halifax's briefing had been thorough and devastating. Marcus Thornfield had been recruited during a gambling debt crisis 3 years ago, gradually drawn into providing increasingly sensitive information in exchange for financial relief and ongoing payments. The Astorian intelligence service had orchestrated the entire operation using Helena's correspondence as both cover and source for their broader espionage efforts. Every letter she had written had been analyzed, copied, and transmitted to hostile foreign powers. The personal betrayal cut deepest. Alexander had trusted Marcus Thornfield implicitly, viewing him as an extension of his own household, a guardian of family secrets and royal dignity. Helena had trusted him even more completely, confiding her deepest thoughts and vulnerabilities to a man who had been systematically exploiting her trust. The violation felt profound and personal, a corruption of relationships that had formed the bedrock of their private lives. Alexander's first instinct was to confront Helena immediately, to demand explanations and express his fury at her reckless endangerment of national security. But Halifax had counseled patience and strategy. The investigation was ongoing, and premature revelation might compromise efforts to understand the full scope of the espionage network. They needed to know who else had been compromised, what information had been stolen, and how extensively Astorian intelligence had penetrated Valdorian institutions. The king found himself studying Helena with new eyes during their daily interactions. At breakfast, when she mentioned a concern about border security, he wondered whether the topic had been suggested by her correspondence with Reyes. During a charity event, when she demonstrated surprising knowledge about Astorian cultural traditions, he questioned the source of her expertise. Every conversation now carried the weight of suspicion and the possibility of manipulation. Helena seemed to sense the change in atmosphere without understanding its source. She appeared nervous during their private moments, constantly adjusting her jewelry or smoothing her clothing in ways that suggested internal anxiety. Alexander noticed her glancing toward Marcus Thornfield with what looked like guilty concern during official meetings. She asked fewer questions about state business and offered fewer opinions about policy matters, as if retreating from engagement that had previously seemed natural and welcome. The investigation expanded to encompass Helena's entire household staff. Halifax's team discreetly examined financial records, communication patterns, and personal relationships of everyone with access to the royal family's private quarters. They discovered that Marcus Thornfield had been more than a passive information broker. He had actively encouraged Helena's correspondence, suggesting topics for discussion, providing background information that would make her letters more substantive, and subtly steering their conversations towards subjects of intelligence value. Security footage from palace corridors revealed the sophisticated nature of Thornfield's operation. Hidden cameras captured him photographing documents in Helena's study, copying her personal calendar to predict her availability for sensitive meetings, and using a specialized camera to capture impressions of official seals and letterheads. His tradecraft was professional and extensive, suggesting long-term training rather than amateur opportunism. Alexander struggled with the decision of how to handle Helena's role in the conspiracy.
Legal advisors suggested that her actions, while technically treasonous, had been motivated by personal rather than political reasons. Her letters contained no intentionally classified information, and her correspondence had focused on humanitarian rather than strategic concerns. However, the impact of her actions remained severe regardless of her intentions. National security had been compromised, international relations had been manipulated, and the Crown's reputation faced potential devastation. The political implications extended beyond personal betrayal. Parliament would demand explanations. Opposition leaders would call for investigations. The international community would question Valdoria's ability to protect sensitive information and maintain secure diplomatic channels. Helena's correspondence had created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit and allies might no longer trust. The damage to national interests could persist long after the immediate crisis was resolved. Alexander consulted with his most trusted advisors about potential responses. Prime Minister Charlotte Davies advocated for complete transparency, arguing that public honesty would demonstrate the Crown's commitment to accountability and national security. Defense Minister Robert Sterling recommended treating the matter as a security breach requiring swift, decisive action to minimize ongoing risks. Foreign Secretary Margaret Campbell worried about the international implications of revealing that the Queen Consort had been manipulated by foreign intelligence services. Each consultation deepened Alexander's sense of isolation and responsibility. The decisions ahead would affect not only his marriage and his kingdom, but also the institution of monarchy itself. How he handled this crisis would be remembered and analyzed for generations, shaping public perception of royal competence and trustworthiness. The weight of centuries of tradition pressed down on his shoulders as he contemplated choices that seemed to offer only degrees of loss rather than paths to victory. Meanwhile, Helena continued her daily routines, unaware that her secret had been exposed and her world was about to collapse. She attended charity meetings, hosted diplomatic receptions, and fulfilled her public duties with the grace and professionalism that had made her a popular queen consort. Alexander watched her performance with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak, knowing that her public persona would soon be tested in ways she could not imagine. The final piece of Halifax's investigation revealed the ultimate scope of the betrayal. Marcus Thornfield had not only facilitated Helena's correspondence and stolen palace secrets, but he had also been preparing for a larger operation. Astorian intelligence had been planning to use their access to plant false information, manipulate royal decision-making, and potentially orchestrate a diplomatic crisis that would destabilize the region. Helena's innocent letters had been the opening gambit in a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to undermine Valdorian sovereignty. Alexander realized that confronting this conspiracy would require more than addressing Helena's personal betrayal. The kingdom faced an act of war disguised as correspondence, an attack on national security hidden within romantic correspondence. His response would need to be swift, comprehensive, and strong enough to deter future attempts at infiltration and manipulation. The quiet betrayal was about to demand a very public reckoning. The confrontation came at dawn, in the private breakfast room where Helena had shared countless peaceful mornings with Alexander throughout their marriage. She entered expecting their usual quiet meal together, perhaps discussion of the day's official schedule, maybe gentle conversation about family matters or upcoming charitable events. Instead, she found her husband seated rigidly at the table, his face carved from stone, with Marcus Thornfield standing beside him in handcuffs flanked by 2 palace guards. The letters were arranged on the white linen tablecloth like accusations given physical form. Helena's hands flew to her throat, her carefully applied morning composure cracking like ice under sudden pressure. She understood immediately that her secret correspondence had been discovered, but the presence of Marcus in restraint suggested implications far worse than she had imagined. Her legs felt weak as she sank into her usual chair, the familiar room suddenly feeling foreign and hostile. Alexander's voice was steady but cold as he began the most difficult conversation of their 23-year marriage. He explained Halifax's investigation methodically, laying out the evidence of espionage and betrayal with the precision of a prosecutor presenting a case. Helena listened in growing horror as she learned that Marcus had been a foreign agent, that her letters had been copied and analyzed, that her innocent desire for intellectual connection had been weaponized against her own kingdom. The revelation that Marcus had manipulated her correspondence felt like a physical blow. Helena realized that many of the topics she had discussed with Minister Reyes, subjects she had thought represented her own insights and interests, had been subtly suggested by Marcus during their regular meetings. Her private secretary had shaped their conversations, encouraged her to share specific information,
and guided her toward discussions that served Astorian intelligence objectives rather than her own emotional needs.
Marcus Thornfield stood silently during this confrontation, his decades of loyal service revealed as an elaborate performance. When Alexander demanded an explanation, Marcus spoke with the calm professionalism that had once reassured Helena but now sounded sinister and calculating.
He expressed no remorse for his betrayal, explaining it as a business transaction that had helped him resolve personal financial difficulties while serving what he viewed as inevitable political changes in the region. Helena felt nauseated as she understood the full extent of her manipulation. Every conversation with Marcus, every suggestion he had made, every piece of advice he had offered had been filtered through his loyalty to a foreign power.
Her most trusted advisor had been her greatest enemy, and she had confided in him completely, sharing not only her own vulnerabilities but also intimate details about Alexander's concerns, state business, and family matters. Alexander's anger was carefully controlled but unmistakably present.
He spoke to Helena about the damage her correspondence had caused, the security breaches had enabled, and the international implications of her actions. He explained that while her intentions might have been personal, the impact was profoundly political. National security had been compromised, diplomatic relationships had been manipulated, and the crown's reputation had been severely damaged. The immediate consequences were swift and comprehensive.
Marcus Thornfield was taken into custody to face charges of espionage and treason. Helena's correspondence with Minister Reyes was officially ended with a formal diplomatic protest to Astoria.
Security protocols throughout the palace were immediately revised, with new procedures for handling all royal correspondence and stricter oversight of household staff access to sensitive information. Helena's role within the royal household faced immediate and dramatic revision. Alexander announced that her access to state business would be suspended pending a full security review. Her private staff would be replaced and thoroughly vetted. Her official duties would continue under supervision, but her informal influence on policy matters would end completely. The partnership aspect of their marriage, never officially recognized but personally meaningful, was effectively terminated. Parliament demanded a full briefing on the security breach, leading to emergency sessions where opposition leaders questioned not only Helena's judgment, but also Alexander's oversight of royal household security. Prime Minister Davies found herself defending the Crown's competence while simultaneously implementing reforms designed to prevent future infiltration. The political opposition called for stricter controls on royal family communications and formal limitations on royal involvement in diplomatic matters. International reactions were swift and damaging. Allied nations quietly expressed concerns about information sharing with Valdoria, leading to temporary restrictions on intelligence cooperation and diplomatic communications. Astoria initially denied involvement in the espionage operation but eventually recalled Minister Reyes and several diplomatic staff members, tacitly acknowledging the intelligence operation while avoiding formal responsibility for the conspiracy. Helena's public humiliation was managed carefully but remained profound. Official announcements described a security review and updated protocols without explicitly detailing her role in the crisis, but informed observers understood the implications. Her public appearances became stilted and awkward, with obvious security restrictions that highlighted her diminished status. The press, initially respectful of official explanations, gradually began investigating and reporting on the broader implications of the security breach. The personal cost to Helena was devastating. Her marriage to Alexander survived but fundamentally changed, with formal politeness replacing the warmth and partnership they had previously shared. Their private conversations became careful and guarded, with both parties aware that trust had been broken in ways that might never be fully repaired. Helena struggled with guilt about her role in the crisis and anger about how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Alexander faced his own reckoning with the consequences of the betrayal. Beyond the immediate security and political challenges, he was forced to confront his failure to provide Helena with the intellectual partnership and meaningful engagement she had sought through her correspondence with Minister Reyes. Her vulnerability to manipulation had been rooted in genuine needs that their marriage and her royal role had failed to address. The investigation revealed additional security vulnerabilities throughout the royal household. Several other staff members had been approached by foreign intelligence services over the years, though none had been successfully recruited. The comprehensive review led to new training programs, updated security clearance procedures, and systematic changes in how the royal family managed their private communications and personal relationships. Helena's attempt to rebuild her reputation and role required years of careful effort. She focused intensively on charitable work, particularly initiatives related to education and women's rights that allowed her to channel her intelligence and passion into constructive activities. Her public appearances gradually became more natural, though she never regained the informal influence she had previously enjoyed. The experience had taught her hard lessons about the intersection of personal desires and public responsibilities. The broader implications of the quiet betrayal extended far beyond the immediate participants. The crisis led to updated protocols for royal family communications, stricter oversight of household staff, and new procedures for managing unofficial diplomatic contacts. These changes reflected lessons learned from a security breach that had exploited personal vulnerabilities to threaten national interests.
Marcus Thornfield was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison for espionage and treason. His trial revealed the sophisticated nature of his operation and the extensive intelligence that had been compromised through his access to royal household information. The proceedings provided a sobering reminder of how personal relationships could be weaponized for political purposes and how trust, once betrayed, created vulnerabilities that could persist long after the immediate threat was neutralized.
Minister Reyes quietly disappeared from Asturian politics. His career ended by the exposure of his role in the intelligence operation. The diplomatic scandal contributed to broader tensions between the two nations, though both sides eventually moved toward more formal and transparent communication channels.
The crisis had demonstrated the dangers of unofficial diplomacy and the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between personal relationships and political responsibilities. For Helena, the quiet betrayal had been a devastating education in the realities of power, trust, and responsibility.
Her innocent desire for intellectual connection and meaningful conversation had been exploited by sophisticated adversaries who understood how to manipulate personal vulnerabilities for political gain. The experience left her wiser but more guarded, more aware of the constant scrutiny and potential dangers that surrounded her royal position.
Alexander's handling of the crisis was ultimately judged as competent but highlighted the ongoing challenges of balancing transparency with security, personal relationships with public responsibilities, and traditional monarchy with modern democratic expectations. The quiet betrayal had tested not only his marriage but also his leadership, forcing him to make difficult decisions that balanced justice with mercy, accountability with forgiveness. The story of the quiet betrayal became a cautionary tale about the intersection of personal desires and public duties, the vulnerability of even the most carefully guarded institutions to human manipulation, and the lasting consequences of decisions made in pursuit of connection and understanding. Helena's correspondence had begun with the best of intentions, but had demonstrated how even innocent actions could be turned into weapons against the very people and principles she had sought to serve.